Welcome back to Legends May Live, where we explore the mysterious, the unexplained, and the downright eerie. I'm Drew, and today we're looking at 4 reports of encounters with a beast said to roam the forests and canyons of Arizona. Each story is progressively more compelling, so stick around to the end. The Grand Canyon is a place of breathtaking beauty. It's an untamed wilderness carved by time itself. But if accounts are true, beneath its vast sun-baked cliffs and shadowed valleys, something truly terrifying lurks. A creature unlike anything ever recorded, a being that defies logic, unsettling and monstrous. In 1903, a man named I.W. Stevens came face to face with something that's baffled researchers for over a century. Was it an unknown species, a supernatural entity, or something far more sinister? I.W. Stevens wasn't just a casual traveler. He was an explorer, a journalist, and a man who thrived in the untamed wilds of America's frontier. He often ventured where others found too difficult or too dangerous. This expedition, he had decided to head to the Grand Canyon region in search of adventure and the chance to document its beauty and the wildlife that called it home. In 1903, the Grand Canyon was growing in popularity, but nothing like today. It wasn't yet a national park, and getting there meant navigating a lot of difficult terrain. As Stevens arrived, the day was warm, the sun was casting long shadows across the rock formations. As he trekked through the rugged terrain, the air smelled of dry earth and pine. It was the kind of day that put you at ease and made the stress just melt away. But suddenly, he starts to hear something moving up ahead. Hoping to catch a glimpse of some wildlife, he slowly and quietly eased his way ahead until the creature came into view. What Stevens saw shook him to his core. Kneeling beside 2 lifeless cougars was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a humanoid figure covered in long tangled white hair that draped over its body. But this was no man. Its beard, matted and filthy, stretched down to its knees, and its hands had talon-like fingers, claws glinting in the fading sunlight. It seemed like they must be at least 2 inches long, but that wasn't the disturbing part. The creature was drinking the blood of the slain cougars. Stevens stood frozen, every instinct screaming at him to run, but the creature had already sensed him. It rose to its feet, its movements jerky yet deliberate. Its unearthly eyes looked into Stevens, and for a moment they stood in silence, man and monster. Then the creature reached down low, wrapping its clawed fingers around a massive club. This wasn't just an animal. It was something with intelligence, something that understood violence. In a flash, Stevens turned and ran away with every ounce of force he had. Primal terror had taken over. Through the canyon, past the jagged rocks, breath burning in his lungs. Only when he reached the edge of the canyon did he dare to briefly turn around to look behind him. There was nothing. He listened closely, but there were no sounds of pursuit. But that didn't mean he was safe. The creature was gone. But what was that thing? Stevens never returned to that spot in the Grand Canyon, and as far as we know, no one else has ever reported a creature quite like this one. Our second story takes place in 1944. A group of Boy Scouts set up camp deep in the forests near Payson, Arizona. The towering pines stretched into the darkened sky, their tops swaying gently in the night breeze. The air was crisp and filled with sounds of chirping insects and the occasional hoot of an owl. A great night for camping. It's a warm night, so most of the scouts decide to sleep outside under the stars rather than their tents. Among the campers is a young Don Davis. He's a boy who would later dedicate his life to the study of cryptids. But on this night, he wasn't searching for legends. He was just a kid out on a camping trip with his fellow scouts, trying to get some sleep. It had been a long day and everyone was tired, but excited for the next morning. They were looking forward to exploring nature, earning badges, and just having fun together. After setting up camp, the scouts grabbed their sleeping bags, climbed in, and began to drift off one by one. But Don's mind raced with the adventure to come, and he was having trouble falling asleep. But finally he got his mind quiet, and feeling like he could finally fall asleep, there was a noise. Faint at first, then louder. Someone, or something, is moving through the underbrush. Don stirs in his sleeping bag. Tired and very annoyed, he assumes it's one of the other scouts, maybe out for a late-night bathroom trip. So he calls out, asking them to be quiet. The response wasn't at all what he expected. Instead of a familiar voice, he hears a low growl as he sees something, a shadow figure, a towering figure looming over him. As his eyes adjust to the dim light, Don takes in the horrifying details. The figure's massive. Its broad shoulders filled his vision. Its face is nearly hairless, but framed by thick, shaggy fur along the sides. And those eyes, deep set, dark, and expressionless. Don is paralyzed with fear, barely able to breathe. The creature stands motionless, its powerful chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. And then, Don is hit with the smell. It was an overwhelming, noxious mix of decaying peat moss, rotting fish, and the skunk-like musk of an animal that hasn't bathed in ages. The scent clings to the air, making Don's stomach churn. And just as suddenly as it appeared, the creature's gone, vanishing into the darkness, leaving only its unbearable stench in its wake. Don remains frozen, his pulse pounding in his ears as he wonders what he had just seen. Years later, Don Davis would recall this night as the beginning of his fascination with cryptozoology. His account became one of the earliest documented sightings of the Mogollon Monster, Arizona's own Bigfoot. Next, we fast forward to 2020. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway, a fishing trip, a chance to escape the sweltering August heat of Phoenix. Two friends, Ron and Mark, set out late on a Saturday night. They were eager for the cool, crisp air of the pines and a chance to kick back and have some fun. By 1:30 in the morning, they had gotten to their usual camping area, but this time they chose a different spot, a choice that would lead to something they would never forget. Instead of their usual campsite, Mark insisted on setting up closer to the canyon's edge, near a trail where, for the most part, no one really used at night. And since they were really tired, they were ready to lie down, they left most of their gear in the car. They only took sleeping bags, a rifle, and a couple of flashlights. As they settled in for the night under the watchful glow of the moon, the towering pines swayed lightly in the breeze, and it really just seemed like the perfect night for sleeping under the stars. But that's when the footsteps began. At first, Ron expected to see another fisherman, maybe someone he had met before. There were plenty of retirees who frequented the area, and if anyone was going to use that trail, it would be them. But when the figure emerged from the canyon, it wasn't at all what he expected. It was an enormous dark form, moving with unnerving precision. It wasn't carrying a flashlight, and it made no sound other than the measured crunch of its steps. The figure hesitated for a moment, as if it was startled by Ron's being there. It stiffened, slightly sliding on the loose gravel when it did. Then there it stood, this looming figure in the dim light, an ominous black mass blocking out the canyon behind it. Ron tried to make sense of what he was seeing, but it was too far removed from his understanding of reality. It was like this solid monolithic door had walked straight out of the wilderness and just stopped feet from their camp. Then, in an instant, it vanished. But it hadn't left. No, only moved, darting to a nearby tree, now watching from the shadows. Ron's heart pounded as he searched for its outline. And then there it was, just 30 or so feet away, crunched low, looking at him from behind a tree. A massive jet-black creature with no discernible features, just watching. He called for Mark to wake up, but there was no response. He called again, louder, but still Mark didn't react. Ron's breath caught in his throat when the figure began to move again. This time, it stood upright, revealing its full size. It was taller and broader than any man he had ever seen, and covered head to toe in thick black fur. It walked deliberately to another tree, never breaking its gaze. The moonlight cast its silhouette against the clearing behind it, outlining a presence that just did not make sense. Ron gripped the rifle. He didn't plan on firing, but he would if he had to, if this thing made an aggressive move toward them, though he thought it would likely not do much good. Every instinct told him that whatever this thing was, it was watching, waiting, and assessing. The minutes felt like an eternity as it paced between the trees, never coming closer, but never retreating. Then, as the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, it just turned and walked back into the canyon, just as silently as it had come. Finally, Ron turned to Mark. He said, "The sun is coming up," and suddenly Mark bolted upright, eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" he asked. Not who, but what. He had been awake the entire time, absolutely terrified, paralyzed with fear, unable to move, unable to react. And as the realization set in, they knew one thing. This trip was over. They packed up and left, speeding back to Phoenix, leaving behind only unanswered questions. Our final story takes place in the White Mountains. It's late. The Arizona wilderness stretches for miles in every direction, the towering pines casting long shadows under the pale glow of the moon. You're alone on an empty road. Your headlights are the only source of comfort. But just as you settle into the stillness of the night, movement flickers in your periphery. Something huge, dark, and impossibly fast darts across the road in front of you. The shape is wrong. The speed is unnatural. Your breath catches, and before you even process what you've seen, it's already gone. This story explores one of the most chilling and well-documented encounters with Arizona's legendary Mogollon Monster. The mass sightings reported by members of the White Mountain Apache Nation in 2006. This isn't just a story whispered around campfires. This was something real, something that had an entire community on edge, and something that to this day remains unexplained. The White Mountain Apache Reservation is vast, over 1.6 million acres of rugged, untamed wilderness. This is a land of deep traditions, of spirits that walk among the living, and of creatures that have no place in modern taxonomy. For generations, the Apache people have spoken of the hairy men, large, shadowy figures that roam the forests, watching from the darkness. Some believe they are protectors, ancient beings that have existed alongside humans for centuries. Others see them as omens, their presence a warning that something is coming. It started in early 2006. A sudden increase in eerie noises carried through the trees at night. High-pitched screams that sent shivers through those who heard them. The scent of rot and musk hang in the air without explanation. But it was the sightings that truly shook the community. Mahori Grimes was one of the first. She was driving home near the town of White River, her headlights cutting through the thick, inky blackness of the forest. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it. Something massive lurching across the road just ahead. Instinctively, she braked, her body tensing as her brain tried to figure out what she was seeing. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something in between, towering with broad shoulders and a heavy coat of dark fur. It moved with a speed and grace that didn't match its bulk, and then, before she could blink, it was gone, swallowed by the woods. As the weeks passed, more reports flooded in. Researchers found enormous humanoid footprints pressed deep into the dirt near livestock pens. Some even claimed to have seen glowing red eyes peering at them from the tree line before vanishing. Fear spread through the reservation, and soon the White Mountain Apache police took notice. Lieutenant Ray Burnett was one of the first officers to look into the claims. Call after call, he heard the same thing. A massive bipedal creature covered in hair, moving like a shadow through the night. But it wasn't just isolated sightings. Whatever this was, it was persistent. It was watching. They were able to find tracks, deep impressions in the soil, far larger than any human footprint. And when experts compared them to known primate footprints, they found disturbing similarities. The sounds, the screams that echoed in the night, they were recorded and analyzed too. And the conclusion? No known local wildlife matched the frequency or resonance of the sounds. So what are we dealing with? Some suggest it's a surviving relic of the past, an unknown species of hominid hidden deep in the forests of Arizona. Others lean toward the paranormal, believing the Mogollon Monster is something else entirely, an interdimensional entity slipping between worlds. Though they were unable to obtain any definitive proof, it's been nearly 20 years since the White Mountain Apache encounters, and the forests are still there, as vast and untamed as ever, and the stories, they haven't stopped either. So the question remains, is the Mogollon Monster real? With documented encounters starting over 100 years ago, it's hard to say that there's nothing out there. What do you think is the source of all these encounters? That wraps up today's episode of Legends May Live. Let me know your thoughts, or if you've got a story of your own, we'd love to hear it. You can find us at legendsmaylive.com or on social media. Make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend who loves a good eerie tale. Until next time, keep your eyes open and keep a lookout, because it turns out legends may live.